Ok.
Devo sapere, chiamando avanti qui.
Chiede una cosa.
Sì. Le mando avanti dal computer.
Sì.
No, yes. Sì, era flex, uso la flex. Sì.
Però slash il secondo. E ci dobbiamo spostare.
Poi ci spostiamo, poi però io mi sposto, ma perché devo, ho bisogno del comando.
Ti possiamo spostare.
Questo lo possiamo spostare di vista.
Se vuoi c'è mezzo qui,
Ovviamente.
yes, yeah.
Io lo giro un po' così, poi magari quando non parli, quando non mi fanno visto da filmato. Ma sono battente. I think so. Think so. All right. I wait for you. Okay, right. Vediamo che prendano posto. Yes.
Dear all, I am really happy to welcome you to the International Congress Phrygia between the East and the West, organized by the University of Pavia together with the New York University and the Collegio Gesù del Maino, of which I'm a rector, and I'm honored to welcome you here today. We will start. I am also glad to thank very much the prominent scholars that have organized this important conference, and the program of the conference shows you how important are the themes and the new researches that will be presented. So thanks to all the panel of scholars who have organized this, and in particular to Professor Lorenzo D'Alfonso. Now I'm really glad to give the floor to the keynote speaker of the Congress, who is Professor Maurizio Aravi, full professor of archaeology and Etruscology in the University of Pavia, former director of the Excellence Department of Studi Umanistici, Humanistic Studies in this university. He will speak about Anatolian sources of Etruscan imagery in the Orientalizing and Archaic age. So I'm really honored to give you the floor, Maurizio.
Yeah, you so
perfect. And now I go away so we can attend to the speech and see the images.
Thanks. Ladies and gentlemen, I am very delighted to open the first session of this international conference about Phrygia between the East and the West, planned and organized by my friend Professor Lorenzo D'Alfonso, held by the Department of Humanities, now run by Professor Luca Vanzago, and by the Del Maino College of the University of Pavia, run by Professor Stefano Collocca, in a very proactive cooperation with the Institute for the Study of the Ancient World of the New York University. On behalf of our Magnifico Rettore, the magnificent rector, Professor Francesco Svelto, to many, many thanks and have a warm welcome for all the distinguished participants. I am convinced that as a non-specialist in Anatolian studies, although attentive auditor in my day at the unforgettable classes by Piero Merigi and Onofrio Carruba, I will learn so much during the next days. I wonder actually why Lorenzo would have assigned this inaugural lecture just to me, so that answering myself, I should suppose that the reasons might have been two. The occurrence that this conference belongs to a strategic development project started when I was the head of our department by funding, a special funding by the university ministry, who recognized it among the so-called, between commas, excellent departments in Italy. And the foundation also planned in the ambit of our strategic excellence project of a new MA in English language, the Ancient Mediterranean World, a title suggesting a virtuous connection between the usually separate curricula of classical and Near Eastern archaeology. Given my expertise as an Etruscologist, however, I must confess that I should be unable to tell you about anything really interesting on Phrygia or other regions of Asia Minor, but I could perhaps reopen on this occasion a not really new dossier, now a bit neglected, that of the cultural relations between Asia Minor and Etruria, a topic which drew the attention, among others, of great scholars like Massimo Pallottino and Eike Ekström, aiming to connect in one system a range of observations gradually originated from disparate case studies. On this occasion, three case studies. My starting example qual è la freccia? Preferite così? Pagina? No. Okay. My starting example will consist in the problematic iconography of a small series of antifixes, terracotta antifixes, coming from the so-called building of the 20 rooms in the Etruscan sanctuary at Phrygia, near Cairo, excavated by the University of Rome Sapienza. You have on the left an aerial photograph of the Phrygia sanctuary with two temples, the temple A and the temple B, and on the right a map with the geographical placement of Phrygia close to Cairo, not far from Rome. The building of the 20 rooms, now in this amusing drawing, you have a reconstruction of the two temples and to the right, the building of the 20 rooms. This building of the 20 rooms has been interpreted as a sacred brothel placed close to the temple of Ishtar, the temple B, and it belongs to the building project by the Philo-Carthaginian king or tyrant, perhaps, Tepharie-Velianas, dated to around 510 BC. The Antifixes, they are four images which may variously refer to deities or and heavenly personifications who are represented attending at the apotheosis of Heracles in Etruscan Hercle before Hera in Etruscan Uni, and follow the seemingly movement of the sun, moving left to right, from east to west, from hinterland to the sea. If the style in which these figures have been molded gets easily recognized as that typically East Greek dominant in Etruscan art of late 6th century, it is far more difficult to find truly convincing iconographical comparisons, and especially in the cases of the so-called demon with cock's head on the right, perhaps Phosphorus, Greek Phosphorus, and the halo, the young sun god on the left. Quite recently, not properly recently, but some years ago, Ingrid Krapskov was able, finally, to show that the model of the so-called Phosphorus, although obviously trivialized, was the originally Neo-Assyrian demon with a griffin's head. As concerns the latter one, I mean the young sun god, I believe in my turn to have been able to demonstrate its direct derivation from the allegory of Haldi Dashi, the light of the most important god in Urartian pantheon, which is certainly depicted on the Anzac Shield. In the map you have a representation of the Urartian area with more or less at the center the locality of Anzac Calais, to the right the map of the fortress. The shield was published by Octave Belli in 1999, a bronze shield. This bronze shield is epigraphically dated to the last quarter of the 9th century, but the excavation context shows that it had been hoarded until to a fire that ravaged the fortress in about 600 BC. This is my comparison, my iconographical comparison. Such a survival after 3 centuries of an iconographic motif, which was still available only 100 years before in a context of religious ornaments, seems to suggest the hypothetical presence in the 6th century Caire of a number of precious Levantine artifacts acquired in the Orientalizing age. In accordance with this interpretative pattern, the specialist in terracotta molding at the service of Tefari Velianas, the king of Caire, although trained in the contemporary international Ionic style, would have reproduced from some Anatolian caimenion the peculiar iconographic character of the haloed demon, just in order to go along with their customer, Tefari Velianas, so passionate about the Orient in his political religious program. Another interesting case, which I would define perhaps rather in terms of Anatolian Oriental revival than of survival, can be illustrated with the really outstanding altar platform of the so-called, in Italian, Secundo Melone del Sodo in the neighborhood of Cortona, Arezzo. On the left, map of the Toscana with Cortona and the aerial photograph showing the hill of the ancient and also post-ancient city of Cortona, and just in front, in the Melone Secundo del Sole. What is this Secundo Melone del Sole? This is a gigantic mound with a diameter of more than 60 meters, which was explored about 30 years ago. It contains two tombs, one of which known since the 20s, and eastward displays a very magnificent stairway. This is, of course, a reconstruction, sticking out from the drum and leading to a terrace, probably for funerary ceremonies, perhaps funerary sacrifices, where one may imagine too also some prosthesis beds. I suggest for this altar platform a slightly earlier chronology than of the remaining grave goods of the first tomb. The grave goods are dated to 575, 550 BC. Therefore, I propose for the architectural building a date between 600 and 575 BC. A time limit, anyway, that one should not surpass because of the strict, very strict comparison with the imaging and dating usually proposed for the Ionic altar at Cape Poseidon, today Tekagaç, I think in Turkish language, just south of Miletus. In short, we are about 80 years before Phrygia's Antifixes. And this is the real view of the restored stairway with the terrace. Apart from the Ionic spirals and the palmets of the balustrades bordering the stairway and the terrace, very Anatolian features, easy to be recognized in the Cortona monument, are, in my opinion at least, certainly the sculptures of the two figured antae or pillars placed at each side of the steps, resuming the well-known ancient palatial tradition of lions or sphinxes as the gatekeepers. You see, this Anatolian model is especially evident in the construction of these lion pillars. This is really an orthostatic construction of these two lions, more exactly one lion and a lioness, which look disarticulated by a three-phased syntax, so to speak. I mean, based on three distinct points of view in a full geometric accordance with the cubic massing of the jump. In these sculptures, an unsolved conflict between figure and architecture is moreover exasperated by a crucial iconographic variant full of narrative signification, which consists in showing a young hero too trapped in the jaws and the claws of the ferocious feline, and telling at the same time his successful act of stabbing the belly of the beast. And just in this narrative tension, although certainly a bit naive, we can recognize the major aim of revisiting at the beginning of the 6th century a traditional Hittite and Neo-Hittite motif, well exemplified from the 14th to the 8th centuries BC. One must assume, therefore, that the sculptor, or I think the two sculptors of the Cortona lions, might have belonged to a vanguard of East Greek artists who already immigrated to Italy closer to the date of Marseille's foundation, display a really autoptical knowledge of Neo-Hittite monuments that had to be still visible in Anatolian landscape. To use the words of Machteld Melling, I quote between commas, Neo-Hittite art and architecture were standing in many Anatolian towns and citadels into the 6th century BC. Neo-Hittite monuments had become known to the Ionians and other Greeks overseas as had surviving Assyrian monuments in southeast Anatolia and North Syria. The visual world of representational and formulaic art of the Neo-Hittite kingdoms was known to many West Anatolians and started the Phrygians on monumental experiments of their own in the 8th century BC. It seems that the interpreter will have to turn east and refer to Oriental inspiration as the clue to what remains puzzling in East Greek perspective. End of the quotation. This quotation is very instructive, very important in my opinion. And this quotation from the great scholar of the Bryn Mawr College raises, moreover, the topic of a third Etruscan case study I would like to submit. It is a problem that was acutely touched on by Mauro Cristofori in a chapter of his 1978 book devoted to the origins of Tarquinian painting. The book is L'arte degli Etruschi. The chapter is dedicated especially to the origins of Tarquinian painting. And the idea by Cristofori was to take in account also the first news published in the American Journal of Archaeology about the Lycian painted tomb recently, in 1978, discovered at Kitzelbel, not far from El Mali. And this tomb was later published in 1998, just by Professor Melling, in an impeccable way. For an Etruscologist who will give a genetic reading of the phenomenon of funerary wall painting in Tarquinia, a phenomenon which developed with continuity from the second half of the 6th century to the first half of the 3rd century BC. If we look at this phenomenon in a genetic perspective, the main problem lies in its sudden start in Tarquinia in around 530 BC, at an interval of about 70 years from the Campana tomb at Veii, on the right, and even more from the Etruscan tombs painted in subgeometric style of the 7th century, on the left. One must underline, moreover, that the decoration of this latter, the first painted tomb of Etruscan series, I mean the tomb of roaring lions, the tomb of the ducks at Veii, and also the Campana tomb, clearly derives the decoration of this tomb clearly derives from vase painting, whereas the Tarquinian painting of the second half of the 6th century, as the tomb of the bulls, probably the first in the series, in spite of possible comparisons, I agree with Ionicizing pottery, such as the Caeretan Aegriae or similar groups, immediately displayed an organization of images programmatically conceived for walls. This is not vase painting transferred to walls. This is a really painting conceived for walls, with a special attention to the symbolic meaning of the spatial relationships within the distinctive architectural features of the hypogea. Just facing this problem, Cristofani realized the need to search for comparisons, not only in the contemporary vase painting, but directly where a social and institutional context, for more reasons comparable to that of Etruscan principes, princes, seems to have produced similar special commissions by local aristocrats to painters of Greek stylistic education, that to say in Phrygia and Lycia, at Gordion, as El Malik, and a bit later at Karaburun. Cristofani also emphasized a passage, a very interesting passage by Herodotus, 164, concerning the very well-known episode of the escape of the Phocians attacked by Persian general Harpagus soon after mid-6th century. According to Herodotus' account, the Phocians had amassed on their ships all the mobile works of art, leaving on the spot the bronze and marble agalmata and anathemata, as well as the graphe. You can read in Greek, also in the English translation, when Harpagus withdrew his army from the walls, the Phocians launched their 50-oared ships, embarked their children and women, and all their movable goods, besides the statues of the temples and everything dedicated in them, except the bronze or stonework and of painting, and then embarked themselves and set sail for Chios. And the Persians took Phocia, left thus uninhabited. So in this passage, we have a clear quotation of the presence in Phocea, not only of temple and marble, agalmata, anathemata, etc., but the presence also of graphe. Graphe clearly means painting. This means that since the early archaic period, East Greek artistic environment included also a painting school of great relevance, probably placed in Phocea, where one is able to quote even the names of two celebrated representatives. We have, in fact, two quotations by Pliny, Natural History 126 and 35:55, two quotations by Pliny about Bularchus. Bularchus, a painter who should have worked for King Candoles, And there is also another interesting quotation by a Christian apologist, Synagoras, Legatio Pro Christianis, 14, about the Sorias of Samos. Samos is not Phrygia, but anyway, the same historic environment, who should have discovered the so-called sciagraphia, the silhouette painting. So there is evidence in the literary tradition about the presence of an important school of painters placed in this East Greek environment. In this regard, too, reading Melling might be useful. Another quotation by Melling: one suspects contact with the East Greek components in the artistic execution and iconography, but yet cannot escape the impression that other components are also represented, less so in style and manner of painting, than in subject matter, with reference just to the Kitzelbel tomb. End of quotation. Our working hypothesis is that, just as in Lycia and Phrygia, a basically East Greek figurative grammar was employed to provide full visibility to ideological contents quite sympathetic to local aristocracy, the same phenomenon happened in Etruria too, and especially in Tarquinia, by virtue of the presence of East Greek migrant craftsmen. The Lycian tomb at Kitzelbel is an extremely attractive and consistent context of reference because of a lot of impressive aspects of closeness to the contemporary tombs of the bulls and of hunting and fishing at Tarquinia. I propose some comparison. You have from the left the detail of the ship in the tomb of Kitzelbel compared with the ship in the hunting and fishing tomb at Tarquinia, or to the right a picture representing a hunt with a deer in a later tomb of Tarquinia, with the representation of these animals very close to the example of Kitzelbel. You have the detail on the tomb, in the tomb of Kitzelbel, with the isodomic altar in the scene of the ambush of Achilles, of Troilus, attacked by Achilles, with the feet, probably the feet of Troilus, and the detail in the tomb of the bulls at Tarquini with the same isodomic representation of the altar and the feet, in this case, of Achilles. And also pictures representing boxers and wrestlers in the case of the tomb, of the Lycian tomb of Elmali, and an example of quite similar fighters at Tarquinia. So there is a lot of possible comparisons, especially with the tomb of the bulls, but not only, also with the tomb of hunting and fishing and other archaic tombs at Tarquinia. In addition to a clear technical stylistic proximity, preparatory sketch in red ochre, flat red, blue, and black colors, male flesh in more or less intense red, light coat of the animals, and female flesh in outline on the pale background, so that even a research for signature patterns doesn't seem to be unconceivable. but it is especially iconography in the first place, which justifies our comparison. In the isodonic chamber of Kitzelbell's tomb, the painted friezes, which develop perhaps, I am not totally sure about that. Melling thinks Boustrophedon. I am not sure, but possibly Boustrophedon on the two main walls. The painted friezes propose a sort of dialogue of a mirroring subjects. In which sense, the painting of the west wall, along which the buried body was lying on his cline, gives a sort of symbolic biography of the deceased. On top, we see the dressing of a warrior near his chariot, a bull to be sacrificed, and other offerings. At the bottom, on larger size, is the departure on the chariot, beside a charioteer also in arms, and the farewell of his old parent, together with two women, one of whom carrying her baby, while a flying demoness, a harpy, a siren, perhaps, is presenting a flashy lotus flower. Further to the right, one can see a symposiac bed with a small dog below. The eastern opposite wall supplements the representation of princes' statues and princes' arete, we can say in Greek, through a complicated hunting scene in the middle, practiced over two different preys, a deer and a wild boar. On top, a parade of hoplites, possibly a small private army, and at the bottom, some martial luddites games. It is worth noticing that this wild boar hunt, this is a detail of the boar, this wild boar hunt doesn't have any heroic or mythological or epic connotation, but adapted to a very well characterized marshy landscape, it requires an approach by boat to the thirsty beast to kill it by a spear shot. With his head possibly north leaning, the deceased looked at the south wall, which is occupied, not coincidentally, by mythological images originating from the Hellenic repertory, images that we assume have been selected by the native customers from the sketchbooks of the East Greek masters of painting who worked at their service. From above, one can meet Achilles ambushing Troilus. You can see the legs of the horse, the isodonic altar, and the feet of Troilus. And other details. On the right, there is what remains of the Achilles arriving from the right. Two boxers, and then a heroic, this is the comparison at Tarquinian, the isodonic altar, crane altar, the horse, and the ambush of Troilus. Then there is a an heroic lion heart with 3 beaters breaking from left, the beast represented in the act of biting a cow or a bull, very badly preserved, to the left. And there are also 3 archers attacking from right. Below, this is a fantastic 2 surviving Gorgons who run after the hero Perseus, lost. The detail of the mask of the Gorgon, and their sister, you can see on the right, badly preserved, their sister Medusa, beheaded, has just given birth to Chrysaor. This is a detail, who stands up close to a newborn wingless Pegasus. Notice that Pegasus is wingless. This is an important detail because also in the tomb of the bulls at Tarquini, Pegasus is wingless. Behind the head of the deceased, the north wall reflects the opposing one by a clearly narrative character according to a sequence that should illustrate, perhaps, from below. But we are not sure that we must start from below. A sea or river journey, probably of the main character of the story. Then a procession with 2 bluish men. You see quite clearly the bluish men just on the right, and the homage paid to an eminent lady sitting on a throne by a hero who brings with him a kind of big cat. You have to check very carefully the detail in the center of the image. You see the head of this feline, a big cat, possibly a chimera. Then there is a sitting old man, a pair of horses, and the scene of a meeting between an enthroned prince and or king and a suppliant. And finally, in the upper register, a cavalry carousel. The mythological and epic features of this rich assemblage of images are quite obvious, but the presumably non-Greek native origin of the illustrated history hampers our understanding. Professor Melling, who gave a special prominence by a basically Greek key of interpretation to themes as the sea journey and the foreign hospitality, ventured the double guess of Odysseus' Phaeacian episode or Bellerophon's exploits in Lycia. Our impression is that the paintings of the North Wall have been conceived to give in an almost bilingual way a sort of summary and sagas, just like the south opposite wall, a comparable summary of Greek sagas. In this respect, the Greek mythological tale of Bellerophon, evoked by an important detail belonging to the southern frieze, Pegasus newborn as a heroic mount, might perhaps help us to reconstruct some nucleus of a corresponding Lycian story. Without deeply discussing that on this occasion, I would like only to mention such episodes as Bellerophon's plea with Proetus, the king of Tyrants, or more likely, Proetus' father-in-law, Iobates, king of Lycia. The exhibition of a captured lion, the big cat, might be a chimera in the presence, hypothetically, of Iobates' daughter, asking for her hand. And the transmarine journey of a young hero, perhaps Bellerophon himself, going to or coming back, it depends, from Lycia. The blue man or bluish man seem to reveal in turn the alterity, I suppose, of some barbaric or even demonic condition, and might depict perhaps the Solimi, the disreputable inhabitants of a marginal landscape too much close to the hellish country of Chimera. The exegetic difficulties are more than one, and they are quite serious, but it is challenging, however, to compare both the Lycian and the Etruscan monument in order to focus on the system of iconographic communication that was built in a similar funerary commemorative context between non-Greek aristocratic customers and the repertory of images offered by these painters of Ionian school. In the tomb of the bulls, you have the ambush of Troilus, and you have Bellerophon with Pegasus without wings in front of Chimera. The same repertory. The east and west walls of the Kitzelbell tomb together depict an ideal portrait of the deceased in accordance with a dialectic polarized on the two most distinctively symbolic spheres of aristocratic life, the hunt and the war, while the north and south walls translate the same vision into the genre of the mythological epic narrative, with a clear separation, however, between the native Côté, north wall, and the Greek Côté, south wall. The masters of East Greek diaspora, who were the bearers of such experiences also in Tarquinia, took from the same repertory the ambush of Troilus and the Bellerophon with the wingless Pegasus and the Chimera, all together present in the tomb of the bulls, as well as the pattern of the rowing boat with its small travelers for the tomb of hunting and fishing, or the boxers or wrestlers for the Cardarelli tomb and the tomb of the augurs, or later the deers for the tomb of the deer hunt. But the main question is, the repertory is the same, the system of iconographic communication shows remarkable similarities, but what does it change in Tyrrhenian Italy? There is a very important changing. I think that the basic elements of changing in the context of Tyrrhenian Italy is a syntactic perception of the architectural or pseudo-architectural space, because the cross correspondence of the four painted walls, as in the case of the Lycian tomb, is denied at Tarquinia by a purely liminal notion of the wall perceived as a diaphragm between this world and the next world, therefore subdivided in horizontal superstitions in accordance with a cogency that was based, I would assume, on the religious belief and rules formalized in detail by the Etruscan disciplina. In other words, the difference lies in the religious perception of the funerary space, which is different in Tarquinia and in Lycia. The repertory of images is the same. The relationship between local aristocrats and East Greek painters is comparable, but there is a crucial difference which lies just in the religious notion of the space of the tomb. In Etruria, this liminal idea, the wall as the diaphragm between our world and the other world. In Lycia, a sort of cross syntax, where the walls find a mirroring correspondence. I think this is my main point. Thank you very much.
Yes. Oh, do we have any questions from the audience? But they won't be able to hear me on Zoom. Thank you for a fascinating lecture. I have a question about the origin of tumuli in Phrygia as we see it. So we start getting tumuli in Phrygia in the early 7th century. We get them at Ordian in the middle of the 9th century. And we only, in Anatolia, until the early 6th century, there are only these fields of monumental tumuli at Ordian and in Phrygia. So do you think that the origin of the monumental tumuli fields in Etruria is actually coming from Phrygia, or do you think the Etruscans are developing the idea themselves?
The problem is very discussed. This geography of tumuli in the Mediterranean. My colleague Naso has written about this problem. Tumuli, on the other hand, tumulus is a shape of funerary monumental building present also during the Bronze Age. We can quote the tumuli also in the Mycenaean context. Not the same, but the idea to create a sort of artificial hill to protect it, and at the same time to emphasize the presence of the prestigious tomb is a very diffused, a very old idea. What is important to underline, in my opinion, is that in Greece, tumulus has been regarded in historical period, in the classical age, as a form of funerary celebration, in some way to be avoided. We know the tumulus for the warriors of Marathon, but this is a collective tumulus. On the contrary, in Italy, tumulus is the tomb of the great aristocratic families in Etruria as a standard, in some way compulsory way to present the genos, the gens, the clan, the family. Tumulus, I suppose that tumulus might have independent formation in many countries. What is important is the ideology which shapes this way arrange the burial. In Etruria, the idea of a tumulus is clearly related to the idea of the celebration of a family. The tumulus is a place where there are many tombs, not only one tomb. So a reference, you see, also a point of reference in the landscape. Take, for instance, the case of Cortona is very, very, very clear. We have the city on the hill, and in front of the hill there is a valley, and this valley is full of tumuli. The tumuli propose out of the city the monumental image of the great families present in the city. This is interesting to be emphasized. In the case of the Secundo Melone del Sodo, you have a very interesting idea to assemble, to hybridize the tumulus with an Ionic altar with terrace. But this bizarre, in some way bizarre operation, this bizarre project is clearly related to the idea that the tumulus must be also the place of a family cult, ritual actions devoted to the ancestors, the presence, the physical, monumental presence of the ancestor in the landscape around the city. Of course, because out of the city there are the land which belong to the rich, important families. This is a very aristocratic view, but I think also in Anatolia, the aristocratic context must be crucial in order to understand the function of these special monuments.
Can I follow that up with one more question? You have the microphone. Okay. Thank you. And one more question about the paintings. Since the earliest painting painted tomb chamber that we did in Phrygia, as far as I know, is the tomb of the roaring lions, which would be the second quarter of the 7th century. Since we don't get painted tomb chambers in Anatolia until over 100 years later, then the idea of the painted tomb chamber would also be an Etruscan innovation.
I can agree. Certainly, the first examples in Etruria are very early, 7th century. The first examples we know until now, we know as figurative painting, only the case of roaring lions, ducks, later of Campana tomb. There are some examples of early tombs with some painted bands or pseudo-architectural elements, but without figurative subjects. Certainly, there is a starting point, precocious starting in Etruria, and this departure, this start of funerary painting in Etruria is clearly, probably related to the necessity of build a funerary space in some way able to communicate something. We have to imagine the Etruscan funerary ceremonies as a sort of festival with a lot of people of the same family, clientes. All the clan is present during the days, more days of the funerary ceremonies. So also the presence of something painted on the walls is important during the funeral ceremony, because I think that there was somebody of the family who, together with the painter, perhaps, was explaining the meaning. Why the ducks? Why the lions? So the paintings were occasion of a sort of performance, collective performance, and dialogue between artist, customer probably, and the family, and all the family. But these first examples of funerary paintings in Etruria clearly consisted in the reproduction on the walls of very common ornamental, between commas, of course, repertory in the vase painting. The ducks come clearly from the so-called bird or herons vases. In the case of the lions, roaring lions, we have a very strict comparison with the earlier vase painting at the Cairo, and later the tomb, the campana tomb, the tomb campana, as you like, as a clear relationship with Corinthian vase painting, with some elements coming from Crete, probably. The difference I aimed at stressing, the difference is that when later, in the second half of the 6th century, in Tarquinia, not at Cairo or at Veii, but in Tarquinia, a painting school starts. This school is really a school of wall painting, not of vase painting translated to the walls, a real wall painting. But there is the novelty of the presence, certainly of the presence of the Greek, of East Greek artists immigrated to Tarquinia after the tragic events of mid-6th century, Harpagus and etc. And so the passage by Herodotus is quite interesting. I suppose I must better elaborate the translation and also the comment of this quotation, because I am not totally sure to have correctly understood exactly what Herodotus explains about this transfer of works of art. But anyway, the crucial point is that Herodotus speaks about graphene, the presence of graphene. So, in general, when we discuss about the origin of Greek painting, according to Pliny, especially Pliny, but also other sources, generally speaking, we say that Corinth was the place, Sicyon and Corinth, the places of origin of Greek painting. But we have another different tradition, evident in these quotations, a different tradition speaking not of Corinth or Sicyon as births of Greek painting, but Phrygia. This is very interesting because we know that Ionian or Ionic vase painting is present in Italy. The painters of the Caerutan Hydriae are certainly East Greek, but not only, probably also the painters of the first series of the Tarquinian tomb. This was the idea of Cristofani, a correct idea by Cristofani. For this reason, I on this occasion, I would emphasize the pioneer essay by this scholar too young, dead many years ago, because the idea was correct. The East Greek link is absolutely crucial to understand the origins of Tarquinian painting. And on the other hand, these examples of Lycian, but not only Lycian, also Phrygian, Gordian, and so on, these examples of painting in Anatolia shows a very comparable, a strictly comparable dynamic of relationship between committenza, the customer, the local customer, and these very, very skillful East Greek painters.
Thank you. I think that's all we have time for questions. I'm sure there are more. Actually, continue that little person drinks. But with that, let's thank Professor Ferrari one more time for this one. You want to do it?
Hi everyone. You're all invited to have a drink with us in Piazza Vittoria in Collection. You're all invited. Join us for a drink.
Yeah.
Ci abbiamo provato.